In a boardroom silenced by shock, a recorded voice confessed to a 30-year lie designed to shatter an empire. The mastermind wasn't present. His downfall was being played from a cell phone held by the city's most improbable spy, a delivery girl named Riley. This wasn't her world, but she was the only one who knew the truth. To understand how she cornered one of the most powerful men in Los Angeles, we must go back 48 hours, to a spilled lunch, a secret overheard, and a promise to stop a devastating betrayal. We hope you enjoyed the journey of chaos, courage, and second chances. What was your favorite part of Riley and Dexter's story? Leave a comment to share your thoughts, and please rate the story from 1 to 5 stars to help us know what you love. Subscribe for more tales of unexpected heroes. Part 1. A Spark of Suspicion. The thermal bag in Riley Martinez's hand felt exponentially heavier than its actual weight. It wasn't gold or jewels inside, but something that demanded even more precision: Dexter Lancaster's lunch. The instruction sheet attached to the order was as long as a manifesto, detailed to the point of absurdity. The grilled chicken breast had to reach an internal temperature of exactly 74 degrees Celsius, no more, no less. The rice had to be cooked from a specific Japanese long-grain variety, with the water measured by a syringe to achieve a perfect state of neither moist nor dry. And the orange juice, dear Lord, had to be squeezed from exactly 5 Valencia oranges picked that morning, with not a single seed allowed to pass. Definitely a Scorpio millionaire, Riley muttered as the glass elevator shot upwards, leaving her stomach somewhere around the 10th floor. She could feel the eyes of the other employees in the elevator on her green delivery uniform, a plebeian splash of color in a sea of designer black suits and white shirts. This was their world, a world built on million-dollar figures and lunches controlled by thermometers. When the elevator doors opened on the 47th floor, the air seemed thinner, more luxurious. The lobby was paved with marble so polished it mirrored the expensive abstract art hanging on the walls. Everything exuded power, wealth, and a cold distance. It was this very opulence that unexpectedly triggered a memory Riley had tried to bury for a long time. It reminded her of her father's small, grease-stained auto shop. A place filled with laughter and trust. Her father, a mechanic with calloused hands but a heart of gold, had placed his complete faith and life savings in his best friend, who had partnered with him to expand the business. Riley still vividly remembered the day that best friend disappeared with all the money, leaving her father with a mountain of debt and a broken heart. What did betrayed trust look like? It smelled of engine oil mixed with the salty taste of silent tears in the night. It was the silence that enveloped their home, where laughter once echoed. The Empire Tower, with its gleaming facade, was a symbol of the very world that had crushed the kind man she loved most. Shaking her head to dispel the sad images, Riley rechecked the address on the order, room 47A. But perhaps because her mind was still wandering, she took a wrong turn at the corridor junction. Instead of heading towards the bustling reception area, she stepped into a side hallway that was strangely quiet. The lighting here was softer, and giant potted plants stood along the path like silent sentinels, casting strange shadows on the floor. And then, she heard voices. They came from a small meeting room at the end of the hall, its heavy wooden door slightly ajar. Curious, and a little worried about being lost, Riley was about to call out for directions, but a single sentence froze her in place, her feet seemingly nailed to the floor. "Do you all understand my request clearly?" A man's voice rang out, cold, decisive, and full of authority. The numbers must be completely wrong. Create an illusion of profit, a vision so magnificent that Dexter cannot possibly refuse. Tell him this merger with Meridian Corp will multiply his fortune tenfold. Riley held her breath, pressing herself against the cold wall. She recognized that voice. George Hartwell. She had seen him in business articles, always introduced as Dexter Lancaster's partner and most trusted friend. When he signs that contract, George's voice continued, devoid of any emotion, he will be walking straight into a trap with no escape. In reality, he will lose everything. 10 times more than he invests. One signature, and the Lancaster empire will fall. A heavy silence filled the room. Riley peeked through the crack in the door. She saw George Hartwell standing at the head of the table, looking elegant in his expensive Italian suit. Facing him were about 15 men, all in suits, their faces pale and tense. They were the accountants, the soldiers of numbers, and now they were being forced to betray their own principles. No one said anything. They just nodded mechanically, the nods of puppets. Riley's heart pounded so hard she feared those inside could hear it. This wasn't a bad deal. This was a financial assassination, a betrayal meticulously staged down to the last detail. She stepped back, finding safer cover behind a giant fern. Her hands clenched the thermal bag, the only thing connecting her to reality: loss, deceit, betrayal. Those words swirled in her mind, dragging the image of her worn-out father with them. George and Dexter, they had been best friends for 30 years. The press had praised their friendship as an icon in the harsh business world. 30 years. A period longer than Riley's entire life. How could such a friendship end with such a cruel stab in the back? The accountants began to leave the meeting room, one by one. They walked quickly, avoiding eye contact, their faces etched with guilt and fear. When the hallway was quiet again, Riley dared to breathe out. What should she do now? A part of her screamed to run, to deliver this lunch, get her tip, and forget everything she had seen. This was a world of sharks, and she was just a small fish. Interfering in this would be suicide. They would crush her without a second thought. She had a family, bills to pay. Safety first. But then, the image of her father returned, clearer than ever. She remembered his painful silence, the emptiness in his eyes when he realized he had lost everything because he had trusted the wrong person. She had stood by helplessly and watched that pain devastate her family once. Was she now going to stand by and watch it happen to someone else, even if it was a difficult millionaire she had never met? No, not again. She would not stand still. Riley looked down at the thermal bag in her hand. It was no longer just a lunch. It was her ticket in. The only reason she could get close to Dexter Lancaster. Perhaps it could also be her weapon. A cold, firm determination rose within her, extinguishing her fear. She took a deep breath, straightened her slightly wrinkled uniform, and smoothed her messy hair. She would not run. She would face it. "All right, Mr. Lancaster," she whispered to herself, a half-sarcastic, half-determined smile on her lips. "Your lunch is about to get a special little ingredient. It's called the truth." With a new purpose, Riley stepped out from the shadows of the side corridor, heading straight for room 47A, where an empire stood unknowingly on the brink of collapse. Part 2. The first move in a fragile alliance. The corridor leading to meeting room 47A seemed to stretch endlessly with every step Riley took. The marble was cold beneath her sneakers, and the elegant silence now felt menacing. Each abstract painting on the wall looked like an incomprehensible warning. She was no longer just a delivery girl. She was an unwilling messenger, carrying a message that could ignite a war. As she neared the frosted glass door of the meeting room, she could see the faint silhouettes of people inside. George Hartwell's voice rang out again, this time warm and persuasive, a stark contrast to the sharp, commanding tone she had heard earlier. He was acting, playing the perfect role of a loyal partner. Riley took a deep breath, trying to calm her pounding chest. Her plan was both insane and dangerously simple. She had to create a disruption big enough to stop that fateful signature, but subtle enough to look like a pure accident. She knocked lightly on the glass door. All conversation inside immediately ceased. 15 pairs of accountants' eyes turned towards her, their gazes a mixture of surprise and a flicker of panic as they recognized her. George Hartwell frowned, his annoyance clear on his perfect face. Only Dexter Lancaster, sitting at the head of the table, looked tired and impatient. He waved a dismissive hand, signaling for her to enter. "Sorry to interrupt," Riley said, flashing the brightest smile she could muster, a smile she hoped could hide the storm raging inside her. "I have the special lunch for Mr. Lancaster. Still hot, smells delicious, just as you requested." Dexter didn't bother to look up from the stack of papers in front of him. "Just leave it on the side table," he said, his voice flat, pointing to a small table in the corner, but Riley had no intention of complying. This was her stage, and she had to seize the spotlight. "Oh, but sir," she continued, her tone full of enthusiasm, walking slowly towards the long main table, "the chef used a secret spice today. Freshly ground black pepper from the Highlands, said to ward off negative energy and scammers." George Hartwell cleared his throat, a sharp sound that cut through the air. "Young lady, we are in an important meeting. Can you just leave the food and go?" Of course, Riley replied cheerfully, completely ignoring his hostile attitude. She moved closer to Dexter, cradling the thermal bag like a royal treasure. "But you have to see this saffron rice. Made from the finest saffron in the world. And there's a secret ingredient that only I know about." Curiosity, even the smallest amount, was a weapon. One of the younger accountants, perhaps too stressed to stay silent, asked, "What's the secret ingredient?" Riley winked playfully. "A little bit of hope that people can still be honest with each other." The room fell silent for a moment. Dexter finally looked up, his gray eyes boring into Riley, trying to figure out the strange girl who was disrupting the order of his domain. "Your name is Riley, isn't it?" he asked, glancing at the name tag on her uniform. "Leave the lunch and we can continue." "But you have to smell this amazing aroma first," Riley insisted, deliberately taking another step, getting very close to Dexter's chair. She leaned over, holding the thermal bag right under his nose, directly over the contracts waiting to be signed. The smell of the food was indeed enticing, but that wasn't her goal. "Just take a whiff," she said. And then, she made her move. Riley pretended to trip over her own feet, a move she had mentally rehearsed dozens of times on her way there. Everything unfolded in slow motion. The thermal bag flew into the air. The lid popped open. A majestic cascade of golden saffron rice, green sautéed vegetables, and brown grilled chicken rained down. Its destination, Dexter Lancaster's perfectly tailored suit, the important contract pages, and a portion of the polished mahogany tabletop. Simultaneously, the cup of orange juice Riley held in her other hand met its fate on Dexter's Italian silk tie, creating an abstract masterpiece in vibrant shades of orange. "Oh no!" Riley cried, bringing her hands to her face in a performance worthy of an Oscar. "I'm so clumsy. Mr. Dexter, please forgive me. My mom always told me I should take a dance class, but I thought it was silly. And now look at this." Dexter sat frozen in his chair, completely stunned. Rice clung to his lapel, sauce dripped down his tie, and orange juice trickled from his perfectly coiffed hair. His expression was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and a rapidly escalating anger. George Hartwell was the first to explode. "You did this on purpose," he shouted, jumping from his chair. "How dare you interrupt such an important meeting with this nonsense?" Riley looked at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Nonsense? Sir, you're being very cruel." "It was an accident," she protested. "Although, I have to admit, the stain looks quite stylish on Mr. Dexter. I read in a magazine that it's the new trend. Executives who aren't afraid to get messy on their way to success." A young accountant couldn't help but let out a muffled laugh, but quickly straightened up when he received a razor-sharp glare from George. "This is unacceptable," George continued, turning to Dexter. "Sir, this woman must be fired immediately." Dexter finally reacted. He shot up from his chair, causing it to scrape loudly against the floor. "Enough!" he roared, his voice echoing through the room. Rice was still stuck to his forehead. "The meeting is postponed until tomorrow morning. Everyone out. Get out before I completely lose my composure." The accountants scrambled out of the room like a defeated army, whispering among themselves. George walked past Riley, his eyes cold enough to freeze the room. "This isn't over," he hissed, low enough for only her to hear. When only the two of them remained, Dexter turned and walked out of the room, still dripping sauce. "Mr. Dexter, please wait," Riley called, rushing after him. He stopped abruptly in the hallway, turning to face her, his expression one of pure exhaustion. "What more do you want now?" he asked, his voice tired. "You've ruined my meeting, my suit, and my lunch. What else could possibly go wrong?" Riley stopped at a safe distance. "Sir, I know I might seem completely crazy, and I admit my coordination skills aren't the best, but I need to talk to you about something very important." "Riley, if this is about some personal problem—" "It's not," she interrupted. "It's about you. About your company. About people who are not who they seem to be." Dexter looked at her more closely, and this time, he noticed something different in her voice. The playfulness was gone, replaced by a genuine urgency. "Please," she said, raising her hands as if in surrender, "just 2 minutes in your private office. I promise not to get near anything that can be spilled. This is about something I overheard. Something you need to know before you sign any documents tomorrow." Dexter was silent for a long moment, studying Riley's face. There was something in her eyes, an honesty that couldn't be faked, that made him hesitate. Finally, he sighed. 2 minutes, he said, pointing towards his office, "and don't even think about getting near my desk." In Dexter's luxurious office, Riley kept her promise, standing near the door while he went into his private bathroom to try and clean up the mess. "Your 2 minutes start now," his voice came from inside. Riley took a deep breath. "Sir, I got lost and I overheard a conversation. A conversation about you, about a contract, and about how you're going to lose a lot of money if you sign it." "Go on," Dexter's voice replied, sounding more attentive now. "Mr. George was in a room with 15 men in suits," Riley recounted, trying to be as accurate as possible. "And he said," she paused, mimicking George's cold tone, "make the numbers completely wrong. Tell Dexter he's going to make 10 times more. In reality, he's going to lose everything. 10 times more than he invests." The bathroom door opened. Dexter emerged in a clean shirt, but his face was still full of skepticism. "You're telling me you overheard my partner and 15 accountants plotting to deceive me?" "Exactly," she replied, relieved that he was finally getting it. And it wasn't a maybe kind of talk. It was a "we are definitely going to destroy Dexter" kind of talk. Dexter sat down, rubbing his temples. "Riley, do you realize how absurd this sounds? George has been my friend for 30 years. Those accountants have worked for me for decades. And you're a delivery girl who just ruined an important meeting with a flying lunch." His words hit her like a punch. It was exactly what she had feared. "I know how it sounds," she said, her voice now devoid of any humor, only earnest sincerity. "Believe me, I can't believe I'm standing here saying this either. But sir, I swear on my honor, I heard every word. If I'm wrong, you can fire me, ban me, sue me. But what if I'm right? What if you sign that contract tomorrow and lose everything?" The urgency in her voice seemed to touch something in Dexter. He looked at her, a complete stranger, risking everything for him. "Why? All right," he finally said, breaking the tense silence. "I'll give you a chance. One chance. Prove what you're saying. You have until the meeting tomorrow morning. Bring me real evidence, not hearsay. If you can, I'll reconsider. If not, you will never be allowed in this building again." A new surge of energy flowed through Riley. "Deal," she said, extending her hand. Get ready, Mr. Dexter, because when I take on a mission, I don't give up. Dexter hesitated for a second, then shook her hand, surprised by her firm grip. After Riley left, Dexter sat alone in his vast office. The silence was now heavy. He tried to dismiss the delivery girl's crazy story, tried to believe in 30 years of friendship, but he couldn't. His mind suddenly flashed back years ago, to a night in their college dorm. He and George were working on a business project. Dexter had a last-minute breakthrough, an idea that won them first place in a campus-wide competition. That night, as everyone celebrated, Dexter caught George looking at him from across the room. For a brief moment, before George could put on a congratulatory smile, Dexter saw something else. Not joy, not a friend's pride, but a cold flicker of envy, a shadow that passed so quickly he had convinced himself he had imagined it. He had forgotten that moment for years. But now, it returned, vivid and unsettling. The seed of doubt, however small, had been planted in the soil of 30 years of trust, and it was beginning to sprout. Part 3. The Investigation and the Double-Edged Trap. Riley stepped out of Dexter's office, the heavy oak door closing behind her like a thunderclap marking an end. But for her, it was the starting gun for a race. 24 hours. A sliver of time to unravel a conspiracy that had been years in the making. The fear was still there, coiled tightly in her chest, but it was now encased in a hard shell of determination. She would not fail. Not for Dexter, but for the father with empty eyes in her memory. Her plan was simple, and therefore, extremely dangerous. She needed to get to the enemy's den, where the false numbers were born. The 23rd floor, the accounting department. But a delivery girl loitering there would be spotted immediately. She needed a disguise. The answer came to her in the form of a cleaning cart, abandoned in a discreet corner near the service elevators. On it was a rumpled gray uniform and a baseball cap. Fate has a sense of humor sometimes, Riley muttered, quickly swapping her own uniform for the new one. The shirt was baggy and the pants a bit long, but the cap hid most of her face. Looking at her faint reflection in the elevator's metal panel, she saw a different person, an anonymous janitor, a ghost in the corridors of power, someone no one would pay attention to. Perfect. The 23rd floor greeted her with a tense silence. The air was thick with the smell of paper and stale coffee. Rows of desks separated by gray partitions formed an endless maze. Accountants sat hunched over their computer screens, fingers flying mechanically across keyboards. They looked more like prisoners than financial experts. Riley began to push her cart slowly, pretending to wipe down a few surfaces while her eyes scanned the area, searching for George Hartwell's office. She needed to find something, anything, a memo, a discarded email, a scrap of paper that could prove her story. Looking for something. A soft voice behind her made Riley jump, nearly spilling her bucket of water. She turned to see a middle-aged woman with neatly coiffed hair and horn-rimmed glasses. It was Margaret, George Hartwell's secretary. Riley had seen her a few times. "Oh, no, ma'am," Riley stammered, trying to lower her voice. "Just routine cleaning." Margaret studied her for a moment. Then an unexpected, sympathetic smile appeared on her lips. "You look stressed. Don't worry, I won't tell anyone." She lowered her voice, leaning forward. "To be honest, I've always felt something was off here. Mr. Hartwell. He's a rather cold man, not like Mr. Lancaster." A flicker of hope ignited in Riley. "An ally? Is that so?" she asked, trying to act natural. "Yes," Margaret nodded. "If you're trying to get into his office, there's a chance." She glanced around before whispering. "At exactly 3 p.m., he always takes a coffee break in the lounge on the top floor. It lasts exactly 15 minutes. And he has a strange habit of never locking his office door. He says it shows trust. A trap or an opportunity?" Riley wasn't sure, but she didn't have many options. "Thank you," she said, her heart full of suspicion but still feigning gratitude. "That's very helpful." Margaret smiled. "Good luck," she said before turning away, leaving Riley with a profound sense of unease. At 2:55 p.m., Riley was positioned near George's office, hiding behind a large pillar. Her heart was racing. At exactly 3 p.m., the office door opened and George Hartwell emerged, dapper as ever, heading towards the elevator. This was it. Riley waited another minute before quickly pushing her cart in front of the office. She placed a wet floor sign down and slipped inside, closing the door halfway behind her. George's office was the complete opposite of Dexter's. If Dexter's space exuded a warm luxury with wood and leather, this place was as cold and sterile as a surgical room. Everything was perfectly arranged, frighteningly neat. Not a single paper out of place, not a single pen in the wrong spot. It was a perfect reflection of its owner, meticulous, controlled, and devoid of emotion. Riley began her desperate search. She gently pulled open drawers, flipped through files. It was all legitimate business documents, nothing out of the ordinary. Time was running out, and then she heard footsteps. George was coming back. Much earlier than expected. Panicked, Riley looked around for a place to hide. Under the desk. She quickly squeezed under the massive ebony desk just as the doorknob began to turn. She held her breath, making herself as small as possible in the darkness. George entered the room. But he wasn't alone. He was on the phone. "Yes," George said, his tone chillingly relaxed. "Everything is proceeding as planned. No, don't worry about the accountants. I have enough information to ensure their loyalty." He walked towards the window, his back to the desk. "Take Harold Johnson, for example. His mother's medical bills are a wonderful motivator. And Garcia is having trouble with the IRS. It's so easy to control people when you know their weaknesses." Riley felt a wave of nausea. She was hearing live evidence, a blackmailer's confession. She tremblingly took out her phone, turned on the voice recorder, and carefully slid it out from under the desk. "What about the delivery girl?" George continued. "Ah, my little bird has confirmed she's snooping around. Margaret is such a devoted employee. She did exactly as I asked." Riley's heart stopped. Margaret. It was a trap. The entire friendly conversation was an act. She had been played spectacularly. "I've already prepared a file on her," George said, his laughter sounding ghoulish. "A few fake documents, some doctored photos. Enough to turn her into a professional blackmailer in Dexter's eyes. Sentimentality is his greatest weakness. He'll believe our 30 years of friendship over the word of a stranger with a sordid record." The office door opened again. This time, it was Margaret. "Sir, here is the file on Miss Martinez," she said, her tone completely different, cold and obedient. "Excellent," George replied. "Make sure security finds her within the hour. It's almost time for the curtain to fall." Riley felt a chill run down her spine. She wasn't just facing a con man, but an entire network set up against her. She quickly stopped the recording, saved the file, and swiftly transferred it to a small USB drive she always carried in her pocket. It was an old habit from her student days, but now it might just save her life. After George and Margaret left, Riley waited a few heart-pounding minutes before daring to crawl out from under the desk. She had to get out of there immediately, but as she peeked through the door, she saw two large security guards heading towards her from the end of the corridor. It was over. They didn't say a word, just gestured for her to follow. Their silence was more intimidating than any threat. They escorted her up to the 47th floor, straight to Dexter's office. The scene inside left her speechless. George was standing beside Dexter, a look of fake concern and worry on his face. Dexter sat behind his desk, his face a hard, emotionless mask, but his eyes were different. They looked at her with a profound sense of disappointment and disgust. On the desk, between him and her, was a brown file. George pushed it towards her. "We had you investigated, Riley," he said, his voice full of feigned sadness. For Dexter's safety. Riley opened the file, her hands trembling. Inside was a nightmare. Intricately forged reports, photos of her talking to strange men in upscale restaurants, undoubtedly photoshopped, and even a fake copy of a criminal record, stating she had been previously arrested for extortion. It was a masterpiece of deceit. "This isn't real," she stammered, looking up at Dexter, pleading for a glimmer of trust in his eyes. But there was nothing, only a wall of ice. "I gave you a chance," Dexter said, his voice as cold as stone. "I actually wanted to believe you. But what is this? Do you think I'm a fool? You were going to use a fabricated story to extort money from me, just like you did with the others? No? George is lying to you," Riley cried, desperate. "He admitted everything. I have proof." She reached into her pocket for her phone. "Enough," Dexter interrupted, standing up. The disappointment in his eyes had now turned to rage. "I believed in 30 years of friendship. I believed in loyalty. And I was a fool to let someone like you make me doubt that for even a second." He turned to the security guards. "Get her out of here. And make sure she is never allowed to set foot in this building again." "Dexter, please," Riley sobbed. But it was too late. The security guards took her by the arms. "You're making a terrible mistake." He didn't answer, just turned his back on her, a gesture more final and cruel than any words. As she was dragged out of the office, she saw George place a comforting hand on Dexter's shoulder. On George's face was a discreet smile, the smile of a victor. Riley was escorted through the luxurious corridors, past the curious stares of the employees. Her tears blurred everything. She had lost, utterly failed. When the main doors of the Empire Tower slammed shut behind her, she stood alone on the bustling sidewalk of Los Angeles. She had been humiliated, fired, and branded a criminal. She had lost everything. But as she raised a hand to wipe her tears, her fingers brushed against a small, hard object in her jacket pocket. The USB drive. She still had it. She still had the truth. But the only person who needed to hear it had completely closed the door to his heart. Standing in the middle of the vast city, Riley felt more alone than ever, clutching the only piece of evidence against an empire of lies. Part 4. Assembling the Forced Army. The Los Angeles sun was harsh and unforgiving, but Riley felt none of its warmth. She stood on the sidewalk, her back to the glass and steel of the Empire Tower, a cold monument to her failure. The sound of car horns, the chatter and laughter of the passing crowd, seemed to belong to another world. In her world right now, there was only the deafening silence of defeat and the bitter taste of helplessness. She had been beaten. George had anticipated her every move, turning Margaret's kindness into a trap, twisting her truth into a lie. And Dexter, the image of his eyes, cold and filled with disgust, cut into her heart like a shard of broken glass. He hadn't just disbelieved her, he had despised her. Tears began to well up again, hot and bitter. What had she done all this for? To be thrown out onto the street like trash? Anger began to seep in, replacing the pain. Not a fleeting anger, but a deep, simmering rage. Anger at George, for his cruelty. Anger at Dexter, for his blindness. And anger at herself, for being so naive as to think she could take on an entire system alone. The word echoed in her head. She was wrong. Her biggest mistake wasn't trusting Margaret, but thinking she could fight this battle by herself. George wasn't an individual. He was a system built on the fear of others. And then, an idea struck her, as bright as a lightning bolt in a storm. If fear was George's weapon, then the truth was hers. And she wasn't the only one who possessed it. There were 15 others, 15 men sitting hunched behind those gray partitions, who also knew the truth. They weren't accomplices, they were the first victims. Her fingers closed around the USB drive in her pocket. She still had the recording. She still had leverage. A new plan, far bolder and more dangerous, began to form. She wouldn't try to convince the king on his throne anymore. She would assemble an army from his very slaves. Riley knew she couldn't get back into the building. But she knew the employees had to leave. She found a coffee shop across the street, chose a table by the window, and began her vigil. She ordered a black coffee, its bitterness helping to keep her mind sharp. She watched the flow of people in and out of the tower, memorizing the faces of each accountant she had seen in George's meeting room. 5 o'clock, then 6. Finally, familiar figures began to emerge. She saw Robert Garcia, the man with the perpetually worried expression. She saw Thomas Chen, looking gaunt and exhausted. But the one she was looking for was Harold Johnson. Of all of them, he had the most tormented and conflicted look on his face. He was the weakest link, and therefore, could also be the strongest if given the right reason to fight. She saw him heading towards the employee parking garage. Riley quickly paid and followed, keeping a safe distance. She waited until he reached his old sedan, isolated from the crowd. This was the moment. "Mr. Johnson," she called softly. Harold spun around, his face paling when he recognized her. "You? What are you doing here? You're not allowed." "I know," Riley interrupted, holding up her hands to show she meant no harm. "I won't keep you long. I just want to talk. About your mother." The words hit their mark. The entire defensive posture on Harold's face crumbled, replaced by sheer panic. I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do," Riley said, her voice gentle but firm. "I know about her illness. I know about the medical bills. And I know George Hartwell knows too. I heard everything." Harold leaned against his car, looking as if all his strength had been drained. "What do you want from me?" he whispered, his voice full of despair. "I don't want anything from you," Riley replied. "I want to help you. Help all of you." She told him her father's story, of the betrayal and the pain that had followed her family for years. "I can't stand by and watch that happen again. George is using your pain, all of your pain, to serve his own greed. He's turning you into weapons against another man, and when it's all over, he'll discard you without a second thought." Harold was silent, his eyes staring into the distance. "He won't stop," Riley continued. "Today it's Dexter Lancaster. Who will it be tomorrow? He has power because he divides you. He makes each of you believe you're the only one carrying this secret burden. But you're not alone." She took out the USB drive. "On this is the recording of George admitting everything. Blackmailing you, deceiving Dexter. All of it." Harold stared at the tiny USB drive as if it were a ticking bomb. But if we go against him, we'll lose our jobs." "I can't. My mother. If you don't go against him, and his plan succeeds, the company will collapse. You will all lose your jobs," Riley argued. "And guess who will be blamed for the fraudulent numbers? Not George. It will be you. You'll lose your job, your reputation, and you'll have nothing left to help your mother. This isn't a choice between safety and danger. It's a choice between fighting for a chance to survive, and certain destruction." The cold logic in her words seemed to pierce through Harold's veil of fear. He looked at her, for the first time, not as a troublemaker, but as a slim ray of hope. What are you planning to do?" "I need a meeting," Riley said. "With all 15 of you. In a safe place, outside this building. Can you arrange that?" Harold hesitated for a long time. Riley could see the intense struggle playing out in his mind. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "Tonight, 8 o'clock, at the Ledger Bar, in the back room. It's old and no one pays attention to it." That night, at 8 o'clock, Riley walked into the private room of the Ledger Bar. The room smelled of stale beer and desperation. 15 men sat around a long table, no one speaking to each other. The air was thick with suspicion and fear. They looked at her as if she were the one leading them to the gallows. Riley wasted no time. She placed a small portable speaker on the table and plugged in the USB drive. "Before I say anything," she began, I want you to listen to this. She pressed play. George Hartwell's voice filled the silent room. Clear and cruel. Yes, don't worry about the accountants. I have enough information to ensure their loyalty. Take Harold Johnson, for example. His mother's medical bills are a wonderful motivator. And Garcia is having trouble with the IRS. As the recording continued, Riley watched each man's face. She saw the shame as their secrets were exposed, but it was quickly replaced by another, much stronger emotion: fury. They weren't just hearing their own secrets, but the secrets of their colleagues. They heard the contempt in George's voice as he spoke of them, treating them like disposable pawns. When the recording ended, no one said anything. The silence this time was different. It was no longer the silence of fear, but the silence of a gathering storm. He thinks of us as garbage. Robert Garcia was the first to speak, his voice trembling with anger. He's known about my situation for 2 years, another man said. He's held it over my head like a sword. Riley let them vent. She let that shared outrage connect them. When the room had quieted down a bit, she spoke. You see, she said, her tone calm but powerful. His power comes from making you believe you are alone. But you are not alone. You have each other. And now, you have this evidence. But he'll fire us all, said Kevin O'Sullivan, an older man with silver hair. He can fire 1, maybe 2, Riley countered. But can he fire all 15 experienced accountants right before a landmark merger without triggering a massive internal investigation? Dexter Lancaster may be blinded by friendship, but he's not stupid. Neither is the board of directors. An act like that would be a giant red flag. She walked around the table, looking each man in the eye. I'm not asking you to do this for me or for Dexter Lancaster. I'm asking you to do this for yourselves. For your professional honor, which George is trampling on. For your families, whom he is using to threaten you. And for your freedom. She stopped in front of Harold. This is your chance to take back control. In the meeting tomorrow morning, when George asks you to confirm the false numbers, you will all stand up together, at the same time. And you will present the real numbers. Present the evidence of blackmail. He can deal with one of you, but he cannot deal with all of you. The room fell silent again, but this time it was the silence of consideration. They looked at each other, men who had worked together for years but had never truly known each other's burdens. Tonight, they saw. Harold Johnson was the first to stand. I can't live in fear anymore, he said, his voice trembling but resolute. I'm in. Robert Garcia stood next. For my daughter, he said. Then Kevin O'Sullivan. For my 30-year career. One by one, they stood. 15 men, 15 stories of desperation, now united into a wall of resistance. Riley looked at them, a sense of pride and relief washing over her. She was no longer alone. She had an army, an unwilling army, assembled from the oppressed, but an army nonetheless. All right, she said, a genuine smile gracing her lips for the first time that day. Then let's prepare for a revolution. Part 5. The Final Showdown. Dawn broke over the Los Angeles skyline, painting the skyscrapers in hues of orange and soft purple. But for Riley, it was not a peaceful morning. It was the bell tolling for the final battle. She arrived at the Empire Tower before 7. The USB drive containing the truth nestled in her palm like a bullet. She had an army. It was time to launch the attack. But George Hartwell was always one step ahead. As Riley stepped out of the elevator on the 47th floor, she saw George leaving Dexter's office, a smug smile on his face. That smile made her stomach clench. Riley? He said, his tone falsely cheerful. What a surprise to see you here so early. Where's Mr. Dexter? She asked directly, ignoring his attitude. Oh, I had to move our meeting up, George replied casually. In fact, the entire schedule has been changed. The contract will be signed at 8 o'clock sharp. Dexter is getting ready right now. The blood in Riley's veins turned to ice. 8 o'clock. The clock on the wall read 7:40. 20 minutes. She had walked right into his trap. "I know," George said, his smile now turning cold. "Time flies when you're having fun, doesn't it?" There was no time for subtlety. Riley bolted towards the main elevators, but two large security guards blocked her path. They recognized her instantly. "Sorry, Miss Martinez," one said, his voice emotionless. "We have orders not to allow you on the executive floors." Orders from Mr. Hartwell. Riley knew she couldn't argue. She turned, walked towards the restroom, but as soon as she was out of their sight, she dashed for the emergency exit door. 16 floors. She looked up the endless spiral staircase. "You've done worse, Riley," she told herself, starting to climb, taking 2 steps at a time. By the 33rd floor, she heard the crackle of a walkie-talkie echoing in the stairwell. "Check all exits on the upper floors." She might be using the stairs. They were hunting her. Riley pushed herself faster, her calves burning. By the 38th floor, she heard heavy footsteps coming down from above. They were closing in. She suddenly remembered the service elevator on this floor, less monitored. It was her only chance. She peeked through the door. The hallway was empty. She ran to the service elevator and pressed the button. The doors opened immediately. Luck hadn't completely abandoned her. Riley stepped inside, pressed the button for the 47th floor, and leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. The display showed the numbers climbing, 39, 40, 41. And then, on the 45th floor, the elevator stopped. The doors opened. Dexter Lancaster stepped in, adjusting his tie, looking as tense as if he were preparing for the most important meeting of his life. "Riley?" he gasped, his eyes wide. "Mr. Dexter," she exclaimed, too relieved to hide it. "What luck finding you? I need to show you something urgently." "Riley, we've been over this," he frowned, disappointment returning to his eyes. "George explained everything." "That evidence was fake," she said desperately. "I have real proof this time. George has been embezzling money from the company for years." "Riley, please." At that exact moment, the lights in the elevator flickered and died. The metal box shuddered violently and came to an abrupt halt between floors. They were plunged into darkness and absolute silence. "What happened?" Dexter asked, his hand fumbling for the buttons to no avail. Somewhere in the building, George was giving an order over the phone. "Cut the power to all service elevators. We have a security situation." Trapped in the confined space, the darkness amplified every sound. Their breathing, Riley's racing heart, all the chaos outside had vanished, leaving only them and the truth hanging in the air between them. "Dexter," Riley whispered, her voice trembling. "I know it's hard to believe me, but I'm begging you, just trust me this one time." In the dark, undistracted by fake evidence or lies, Dexter could feel the absolute sincerity in her voice. "Why is this so important to you?" he asked softly. Riley took a breath. "Because I watched my father get betrayed by the person he trusted most, and I know how that can destroy a person. And because I care about what happens to you." A long silence followed. Then, in the complete darkness, Riley felt Dexter's hand gently touch her face. "Riley," he murmured. And then, they kissed. A soft kiss, but it held all the tension, the doubt, and the fragile hope that had been building between them for days. It was an acknowledgement, a surrender to an undeniable truth. When they pulled apart, they were both breathing a little faster. "Wow," Riley whispered. Dexter let out a low chuckle in the dark. "Sorry, I don't know what came over me." "Don't be sorry," Riley said quickly. It was really nice." The tension had broken. "Riley," Dexter said, his voice completely different now. "Show me your proof." Riley turned on her phone's flashlight. The faint light illuminated their faces as she opened the photos of the documents. "Here," she said. "Company fund transfers to George's personal accounts. For the last 5 years." Dexter stared at the screen, his expression shifting from skepticism to shock, then to horror as he recognized the official signatures and seals. Is this real?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Completely real," Riley confirmed. "And I have more." At that moment, the elevator lights flickered back on. The box began to move. When the doors opened on the 47th floor, they rushed out, an alliance forged in darkness. "The main conference room," Dexter said. They saw it immediately. Through the glass wall, George was at the head of the table, confidently presenting to the entire board of directors. The door was locked. "He's presenting the contract," Riley whispered, trying to read his lips. "He's calling it the deal of the century." "The accountants," Dexter said suddenly, an idea flashing. "Exactly," Riley exclaimed. "This whole fraud only works because they provide the fake numbers. If we can get them to tell the truth." "They're too scared," Dexter argued. "Not if they know they're not alone," Riley said, pulling out her phone. "They're not 15 weak individuals. They're an army." They started making calls. A frantic, desperate series of calls. "Robert Garcia, this is Dexter Lancaster," Dexter said into his phone. "I know about your situation with the IRS, and I know George is using it against you. But if this deal fails, you'll lose your job anyway." "Thomas, it's Riley again," she said in another call. "I know you're scared. But think about it. If the company is destroyed, you won't have a salary to pay alimony." One by one, they planted the seeds of rebellion. The fear was still there, but another emotion was rising. Anger. Finally, Riley set up a conference call with 9 of them. "Listen to me," she said, her voice full of emotion. "George has power over each of you because you keep your secrets in fear. But imagine if all of you stood up together and told the truth. And if he fires us?" a nervous voice asked. Dexter took the phone. "Then you will have solid grounds to sue the company for wrongful termination," he said firmly. "And I will personally promise to provide each of you with the best possible references. More importantly," Riley said, taking the phone back, "you will regain your dignity." After a long silence, Harold Johnson's trembling but determined voice came through. "What do we need to do?" "Do the one thing George never imagined you would," Riley said. "Tell the truth." 30 minutes left. They hung up. And then, they heard footsteps. Harold Johnson was walking towards them, followed by Robert Garcia, Thomas Chen, and all 15 accountants. Each carried folders. They were an army. "Mr. Lancaster," Harold said, "it's time to tell the truth." But the door was still locked. Riley saw Margaret, George's secretary, standing in the hallway, her face a mask of conflict. "Margaret," Riley called. "You have the key, don't you?" The assistant hesitated, her face pale, clearly torn. I can't, Mr. Hartwell." "Margaret," Harold stepped forward, his voice not just pleading but respectful. "Please. You've worked here for over 20 years. You've been here longer than Mr. Hartwell. You know what kind of man Mr. Lancaster is. You watched him build this company from nothing. Are you really going to stand by and watch a good man be destroyed, and his legacy torn apart by someone like George?" Harold's words struck at Margaret's deep-seated loyalty, not to a temporary boss, but to the company and its true leader. She looked towards the meeting room, where George was pontificating, then back at the determined group before her, people fighting for the truth. Finally, she made her decision. She sighed and pulled a golden key from her pocket. "Mr. Lancaster once told me that true loyalty is to integrity, not to an individual," she said, handing the key to Dexter. "I hope I'm doing the right thing." "You are," Riley said, taking the key and throwing the door wide open. Every head in the boardroom turned towards them. "Sorry to interrupt," Riley said, stepping in with her army, "but there is some important information you need to hear before you sign anything." George froze for a moment, then quickly recovered his indignant facade. "This is unacceptable. Security. This woman is not authorized to be here." Actually, she is, Dexter said, stepping in behind her. As CEO of this company, I authorize her presence. George tried to maintain control. Dexter, you're clearly not thinking straight. This woman has manipulated you. Mr. Hartwell, Harold interrupted. With all due respect, you are the one who has manipulated us. He spread documents on the table. These are the real numbers. One by one, the accountant stepped forward, presenting evidence of blackmail. But George was prepared. This is a ridiculous charade, he shouted. Dexter, you are the mastermind. You tried to push through a risky deal, and now you're trying to make me the scapegoat. A board member, clearly bribed, stood up to support George, demanding an immediate vote. The room descended into chaos. Then explain this, Riley said, connecting her phone to the room's sound system. George's voice filled the air, clear and undeniable. On Monday, I'm going to destroy Dexter's company from the inside. He won't even know what hit him. Absolute silence fell. This is taken out of context, George stammered. Riley played another clip, the one where he detailed how he blackmailed the accountants. Explain the context of this, she said coldly. And then, the mask of George Hartwell shattered. Fine, he roared, the rage of 30 years of suppressed envy finally exploding. You know what, Dexter? 30 years. For 30 years I've had to live in your shadow. The brilliant Dexter Lancaster. The visionary Dexter Lancaster. And what was I? Your loyal best friend. The entire room was stunned by his transformation. You always had everything, George continued, his words dripping with venom. The best opportunities, the biggest successes. I had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. You think we were friends? I pretended to be your friend for 3 decades, waiting for the day you would fail. And finally, I created it myself. His cruel confession hung in the air. At that moment, the conference room doors opened again. 3 men in dark suits entered, flashing FBI badges. George Hartwell, the lead agent said, you are under arrest for corporate fraud, blackmail, and embezzlement. As he was being handcuffed, George looked at Dexter one last time. You never deserved any of it, he muttered before being led away. The room was empty, leaving only silence and the wreckage of a 30-year friendship. Dexter stood motionless, staring at the spot where George had been. Riley cautiously approached him. Dexter, she said softly. I'm sorry. He looked at her, his eyes filled with unshed tears. 30 years, he whispered. How could I have been so blind? He took a step back as she reached for him. No, he said, his voice breaking. I can't do this right now. I just found out my best friend has hated me for 3 decades. How can I ever trust anyone again? The pain in his voice broke Riley's heart. I need time, he continued. Before we can. Riley nodded, swallowing her own tears. I understand, she said softly. I'll be here when you're ready. Dexter looked at her one last time before turning and walking away, leaving Riley alone amidst the ruins of a betrayal and the fragile beginning of something that could have been beautiful. Part 6, Wounds, Healing, and a New Beginning. The air in the luxurious conference room was still thick with the raw, bitter smell of truth. George had been led away, leaving a void not just in the room, but in 30 years of Dexter Lancaster's life. He stood there, a king who had lost his kingdom of trust, adrift in the wreckage of a counterfeit friendship. Riley looked at him, her heart aching at the unconcealed pain in his eyes. She had won the battle, but the man before her looked like a casualty of war. When she stepped towards him, he stepped back, a small distance that felt as wide as a chasm. His words, "How can I ever trust anyone again?" were a wall of ice erected between them. She understood. The pain of betrayal is an acid that can corrode even the strongest of hearts. He wasn't pushing her away out of dislike, he was pushing her away out of fear. fear that any connection could be another waiting blade. A week later, Riley left Los Angeles. She wasn't running away. She was moving forward. She left not with a broken heart, but with a quiet understanding. She had done what needed to be done. Now it was time for her to build something for herself, something no one could take away. 2 months passed like a blink of an eye, yet long enough to change both their worlds. In Chicago, in a small office that always smelled of spices and new beginnings, Riley Martinez stood before a group of discerning restaurant owners. She was no longer wearing the green delivery uniform. She wore a simple but elegant business dress, her hair tied back neatly. She was pitching Riley's Rush, the gourmet delivery company she had built from scratch with a small startup loan. "We don't just deliver food," she said, her voice filled with confidence and passion. "We deliver an experience. We ensure that your white truffle cauliflower soup arrives at the customer's table at the perfect temperature, and that your chocolate soufflé is still fluffy. We are the final bridge between your kitchen and your diner's heart." She had turned the obsessive precision she once mocked in Dexter into her business philosophy. She had turned chaos into control, clumsiness into attention to detail. She was succeeding, not a world-shaking success, but her own, built on integrity and hard work. Sometimes, late at night while checking spreadsheets, the image of Dexter's gray eyes would surface, but the ache had now given way to a sweet nostalgia. She wished him peace. Meanwhile, thousands of miles away, Dexter Lancaster was anything but peaceful. He sat in his office on the 47th floor, but it no longer felt like home. It was empty. He had fired Margaret and restructured the entire leadership. The company was saved, but he felt more hollow than ever before. He spent hours staring at an old framed photo on his desk. Him and George, 2 8-year-old boys, grinning, arms slung around each other's shoulders, an old oak tree in the background. Who could have known that the boy with the radiant smile was hiding a shadow of envy that would grow with each passing year? "Betrayal doesn't begin on the day it's revealed," his therapist had said in one session. "It's a seed planted long before. The question isn't why you didn't see it, but why you chose not to see it." Dexter wrestled with that question. He realized he had become so dependent on the perfect image of that friendship that he had unconsciously ignored the smallest warning signs, like that fleeting glance in college. He had been afraid of loneliness, and that fear had made him blind. And then he realized something even more painful. He had pushed Riley away for the very same fear. He was afraid that the intense feelings she stirred in him could also be another illusion, another trap. He had punished her for George's sins. One evening, while aimlessly browsing the internet, he stumbled upon an article on a Chicago business blog titled, "Riley's Rush, A Fresh Wind in the Gourmet Delivery Industry." Accompanying it was a photo. Riley, standing in front of her storefront, smiling. It wasn't the mischievous, humorous smile he knew. It was the smile of a confident, strong woman who had found her place in the world. And in that moment, Dexter knew what he had to do. He didn't just need to heal. He needed to become worthy. A week later, at the Riley's Rush office, a strange order appeared in the system. A lunch with ridiculously detailed requirements, 74 degrees Celsius chicken breast, neither moist nor dry rice, juice from 5 Valencia oranges. The destination, Empire Tower, 47th floor, Los Angeles. And a special note, requesting personal delivery by the founder, Miss Riley Martinez. Riley's heart skipped a beat. Was this a joke? An invitation? A challenge? She spent days wrestling with herself. A part of her wanted to delete the order and forget it. But another part, the brave part that had once stormed a board meeting, whispered that she had to face it. 6 hours of flight later, she was standing in the main lobby of the Empire Tower again, holding the familiar thermal bag. The building was the same, but she was different. She no longer felt out of place. She walked with the confidence of someone who knew her own worth. She didn't have to go up to the 47th floor. He was there, waiting for her in the lobby. Dexter Lancaster stood near the fountain, not in his usual power suit, but in a simple white shirt and trousers. He looked thinner, and there was a weariness in his eyes, but also a peace she had never seen before. He saw her, and a small, nervous smile touched his lips. "Hello," he said as she approached. "Sir," she replied, keeping a safe distance. "Did you order the yakisoba?" He chuckled, a sound she realized she had missed terribly. "Actually, I ordered the special lunch for the most stubborn CEO in Los Angeles," he said. "With a side of ginger sauce and a chance for redemption." Riley crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. "Redemption for what, exactly?" Dexter took a deep breath. He didn't look away. He looked straight into her eyes. "Riley, I've spent the last 2 months trying to understand what happened. Not just George's betrayal, but my own cowardice. I realized that my fear of being hurt again almost made me lose the one person who had the courage to save me when everyone else turned away." A few people in the lobby started to pay attention to them, but Dexter didn't seem to care. "You risked your safety, your reputation, even your life to protect me," he continued, his voice trembling with emotion. "And when I finally had proof of your loyalty and courage, I rejected you. Because I was too hurt to recognize a gift when it was right in front of me. I'm sorry, Riley. I'm sorry for not believing you. But most of all, I'm sorry for not being brave enough to believe in my own feelings." He stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "I never forgot you. Not for a day, not for an hour. You changed my life, and I was too foolish to see it. I'm not asking for immediate forgiveness. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I've learned to trust again. Starting with trusting us." Tears began to stream down Riley's cheeks, but this time, they were not tears of sorrow. "What if I tell you I saw aliens in the cafeteria?" she asked, a hint of her old humor returning. He smiled, a genuinely radiant smile. "I will personally investigate the cafeteria. And if I say I saw Elvis in the elevator, I'll get his autograph for you." Riley reached up, wiping away a tear. Then she stepped forward, closing the final distance between them. "All right then, Dexter Lancaster," she said. "I'll give you a chance." 6 months later, on a Malibu beach at sunset, Dexter knelt once again. This time, in his hand was a diamond ring that sparkled in the evening light. "Riley Martinez," he said, "will you marry me?" Riley looked at the ring, then at the man who had become the center of her universe. "Only if you promise to never doubt a delivery girl again," she replied, extending her hand. The wedding was held in the rooftop garden of the Empire Tower, which had been transformed into a wonderland. The 15 former accountants, now minority partners in the newly restructured Lancaster and Martinez Enterprises, were all there. Harold Johnson, his smile no longer anxious, was the best man. 6 months after the wedding, Riley sat in the office she now shared with Dexter. One hand rested on her visibly pregnant belly, the other held a profit report. "Twins," she murmured, gently caressing her stomach. "I hope you inherit your father's business sense and Aunt Margaret's coordination skills. Because if you're like your mom, we're going to have a serious problem with flying food." Dexter walked in at that moment, carrying 2 cups of herbal tea. "Talking to yourself again?" he asked, kissing her forehead. "Talking to our future CEOs," she corrected him. "I'm explaining the company policy about not spilling lunch on important documents." Dexter laughed, sitting beside her, placing his hand over hers on her belly. "You know," he said, "if it weren't for a spilled lunch, none of this would have happened." Riley smiled, thinking about how a simple delivery had turned into the greatest adventure of her life. "Well," she said, "I always knew I had a special talent for causing just the right chaos at just the right time." Outside, Los Angeles glittered under the sun. And in the Empire Tower, an unlikely love story proved that sometimes, the best things in life really do come disguised as disasters. With a side of ginger sauce.